At precisely 3 minutes past the hour, the customary stillness of royal protocol was shattered, not by the fanfare of trumpets or the practiced cadence of an official herald, but by a silence so profound it carried more weight than thunder. It was a disruption of rhythm that immediately sent tremors through the bedrock of the British establishment and far beyond its borders. This was not the usual carefully managed disclosure concerning lines of succession or dusting off of ancient scandals. It was something far more potent, far more terrifying. It was about a child. Before a single syllable of the official statement was truly processed by the collective consciousness, the mere manner in which Prince William and Princess Catherine stepped forward, unmediated, exposed, and united in visible strain, told the world everything it feared to know about their youngest son, Prince Louis. The message arrived like a sudden drop in atmospheric pressure, a whisper that deafened the room. Buckingham Palace, in a move that signaled deep internal crisis, bypassed the grand press briefings and embargoed pre-announcements that usually accompany significant news. Instead, a single, stark notification materialized simultaneously across official royal digital platforms. The timing, an irregular 3 minutes past the hour, was no mere administrative glitch. Seasoned observers of the monarchy know that when patterns break, it signifies that the machinery behind the scenes has ground to a halt. The post itself was terrifyingly concise, clocking in at under 100 words, yet each carefully chosen syllable possessed a gravity that felt almost physical. But what truly stunned the global audience wasn't just the somber content of the message, it was the identity of the messengers. For the first time in recent memory, the palace machinery stepped aside, allowing the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge to issue the statement directly. It came not through a faceless spokesperson, not via the stiff formality of court circular language, but from parents. Two people breaking through centuries of accumulated royal insulation to speak directly to the public. That act alone was seismic, a desperate measure for desperate times. Their written tone was measured, exhibiting the stiff upper lip expected of their station, but it was unmistakably saturated with sorrow. There was no immediate panic in the phrasing, but chillingly, there was also a complete absence of hope. Instead, the statement resonated with a heavy, crushing acceptance. Phrases like deeply personal challenge, immensely grateful for understanding, and the need for ongoing, quiet support painted a picture far bleaker than anything they could explicitly state. The public, long attuned to decoding the nuanced language of the monarchy, read between every carefully crafted line. Something was catastrophically wrong with Prince Louis, and his parents weren't just asking for customary privacy. They were pleading for a lifeline of space. Within minutes of the post going live, the polished veneer of broadcast news began to crack. Anchors stumbled over teleprompters, their professional detachment failing them. Royal correspondents, men and women seasoned by decades of births, deaths, and constitutional crises, appeared visibly shaken on air, some admitting with trembling voices that they were witnessing uncharted territory. The digital realm exploded into chaos. Social media platforms buckled under the volume of reaction. Telegram groups lit up with speculation, and the shockwaves rippled instantaneously beyond the United Kingdom, dominating headlines in Europe, Australia, and the Americas. This was not mere celebrity gossip. It felt like a rupture in the fabric of a household that many had vaguely assumed was immune to true, uncontrollable misfortune. As the world absorbed the initial blow, the inevitable comparisons began to swirl in the vacuum of information. Veteran commentators felt chilling echoes of the deeply unsettling stillness that accompanied the news of Princess Diana's passing, the sudden disbelief, the terrifying void. Others recalled the more recent, somber finality of the late Queen's death, a moment where time itself seemed to suspend. Yet, this present crisis felt fundamentally different, perhaps sharper. This wasn't about the closing of a long historical chapter or the tragic end of a complicated adult life. This was about a vibrant young boy, a child whose mischievous face and irrepressible energy had provided much-needed levity during stuffy official appearances. Now, that vibrant energy was reduced to a name in a heartbreakingly sterile statement. What haunted everyone in the immediate aftermath wasn't just the sadness, it was the terrifying finality of the language employed. The words chosen by William and Catherine were not those typically reserved for temporary setbacks, broken bones, or minor childhood ailments. They sounded conclusive. They sounded irreversible. In that suspended moment, a nation didn't just hold its breath. It began to collectively grieve, not because it fully understood what had befallen Prince Louis, but because the terrified intuition was that the damage was already done. While the public focused on the words printed on the screen, deep inside the palace, insiders knew the true gravity lay in what William and Catherine were holding back. Royal statements are designed to soothe, to offer a narrative arc that bends toward reassurance. This one did the opposite. It unsettled deeply. Every sentence felt weighed down by conspicuous omission. Analysts noted the heavy pauses, the softened phrasing that skirted around hard realities, and the glaring absence of standard reassurances. This was not the language of optimism, it was the language of preparation for a long, dark road. In newsrooms, the dissection began instantly. It wasn't just what was said, but how the silence was structured around it. Gone were the polished phrases promising a swift return to duties. There were no timelines offered for recovery, no mention of when Prince Louis might again be seen waving from a balcony, no comforting allusions to future events. The message hovered in a terrifying state of suspended animation, calm on the glassy surface, but hinting at a deep, turbulent undertow beneath. The wording appeared to be the product of agonizing deliberation. Leaks suggested that palace aides and the parents themselves had spent hours drafting and redrafting, agonizing over the implications of every single adjective, aware they weren't just writing a press release, but preparing the world for a new, harsher reality. The careful omission of medical terminology, the lack of doctors' names, or even the generic phrase, health issue, spoke volumes. It felt less like a statement of clarity and more like a surrender to a situation that had spiraled beyond their control. The most glaring void, however, was the lack of forward projection. The absence of any mention of a return to school or public life made it clear this wasn't a mere delay in the royal schedule. It was a complete derailment, behind closed doors. Whispers grew into a roar that this crisis had been brewing for far longer than the public realized. Journalists who had covered the beat for decades began frantically revisiting recent footage of Prince Louis, re-examining it through a tragic new lens. Smiles that had once seemed playful now looked strained in retrospect. Moments dismissed as typical childhood mischief were reinterpreted as signs of distress or an inability to cope with the crushing pressure of the spotlight. Even the body language between William, Catherine, and Louis in past months took on new, somber meaning. A protective hand hovering too close, a worried glance exchanged over his head. The signs had been there, scattered like puzzle pieces no one wanted to assemble until it was too late. The shock was not confined to the public. Even some palace staff, those outside the innermost circle of trust, reportedly only learned the full scope of the situation hours before the statement was released. Their grief was not performative, it was raw and immediate. It was the collapse of the comforting illusion that the youngest members of the royal family, shielded by immense privilege, security, and routine, were somehow inoculated against the chaos of real human struggle. Perhaps most devastating was the creeping realization that this was not a temporary hiatus. This wasn't a break. It was the quiet, terrifying beginning of something permanent. The royal facade, usually so impermeable, had cracked, revealing two parents desperately trying to delay the inevitable exposure of a pain they could no longer contain within palace walls, and then, breaking centuries of ingrained royal instinct which dictates that emotion must always be sublimated to duty, Prince William did the unthinkable. He stepped out and spoke not from a script, not from a podium shielded by crests, but from the raw, ragged edge of his own heart. When Prince William spoke next, the future king dissolved, leaving only a father unraveling in real time. His voice, usually so resonant and practiced, faltered. His legendary composure wavered visibly. In that agonizing moment, the monarchy's most carefully guarded illusion, that they are above the fray of common emotional turmoil, collapsed into dust. This was grief, fear, and profound helplessness laid bare for millions to witness. The moment William stepped into that unforgiving spotlight, the atmosphere shifted. This wasn't a speech designed to rally the nation, it was a confession.